Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Eat. This has been a long-awaited episode, and I am so excited. I have been so eager to record this and to share on this because of how important this topic is. So let's set the scene a little bit because setting the scene will give you a good illustration of my excitement. It is Friday morning. It is 6:30 in the morning. I have my lemon water with real salt, which has been my favorite thing every single morning lately. I have an Americano that I made with some organic heavy cream and grass-fed milk. And then I also have a bone broth hot chocolate. And I was having myself a slow morning because I don't have clients this morning before I have to go to the restaurant. So I was enjoying the rainy, gloomy morning that it is. And I was reading and I said, you know what? Let's go. Let's go record. Let's go dive into this episode. And so here we are, diving into this episode. Now, I am going to be summarizing the book, The Forever Dog, talking all about holistic pet care. For those of you who don't know, I am bringing home my second golden retriever next Saturday. I lost my first golden retriever back in February to cutaneous lymphoma. So it's been quite a few months of grieving and mourning and learning and then researching and looking into new breeders. And finally, I found one, and now she's coming home next weekend. So all of this is very coincidentally aligned with the season in my life that I'm about to embark on. And this topic is so important. I've also been sharing more about this on TikTok, which just recently I've been getting a little bit of backlash, which I expected from the veterinarian community, just because I'm just openly talking about how there are a lot of similarities between the pet care industry and our healthcare and the food industry, which I've shared on many, many times, and just the relationships between these two massive industries and how that reflects in terms of what brands are endorsed and how this impacts our health, our animals' health, and so forth. I could save that topic for another day. So this is such an important conversation to be had. It's not being had enough. And for those of you who are dog owners, I think that this information will change your life. Now, it's obviously your decision as to what you do with it, but this is the same for our own health. That is something that I believe so strongly about, is these conversations and discussions and the education around the influence of food on health is not happening enough, and it's not normalized enough. Some people will call it conspiracy or, kind of look the other way. I think there's a lot of awareness being made now given what's going on with the new administration and so forth. But I think at the end of the day, as long as someone has this information, they can then decide what they want to do for themselves. And it's the same thing with their dogs. That's like my biggest belief is, you know what, at the end of the day, if you have the information, if you are well informed and you say, you know what, no, I'm still going to go this route instead, or I'm still going to choose to eat this or live my life this way, then by all means, go ahead. But I think that's the disconnect, and that's the problem, is this information isn't as widespread. We aren't informing the population enough, which is obviously part of my mission, is to inform. And so as a result of that, we just don't know. And then we're making these choices, thinking it's safe, thinking it's okay. And I'm not just saying for dogs. This is right now I'm talking about for all human health. We're making choices thinking that, well, if it's on the shelf, it's safe. Or if the FDA approves it, then it's okay, And I think at the end of the day, this is blatantly not the case. A lot of the foods that we're eating are not foods. They are food-like substances, and they are harming us. They are causing our health concerns and driving chronic illness. And so I think as long as that was made transparent and that was made obvious, like look at the connection between these foods and what's happening and how this is impacting us and what we can be doing instead, then people can decide based on that. And that's where we're missing missing it. That transfer of, here's the information, let's make it widely available to everyone, let's show it as what it is, as opposed to just normalizing eating the standard American diet and not really giving ourselves the opportunity to make a better choice, because we don't know that we need to be making better choices, if that makes sense. So that is how I feel about the pet care industry as well. I know that it is a financial investment. That's something that I've given thought to around, okay, how am I going to make this most cost effective? How am I going to still support her with an awareness around the fact that I need to support myself as well, and kind of giving all of that some serious thought. But there's a lot of things that we can be doing, even if we're not fully replacing their food, just to amplify the nutritional value of their food, or offer certain supplements, or just swap out certain things just to make it a tiny bit better and to support them in a little bit more of a way that is conducive to better health and preventative health. And that's what I'm here to share with you today. This episode might end up being 2 parts, just because I feel like there is so much, and you know how I am. I can get on tangents very easily. I am no stranger to a tangent, as you all know. So bear with me here. We are diving into a very dense book of tons of information, and I want to read a lot directly from the book because I think a lot of it is well researched and evidence-based, and that's important to me, that I'm sharing on what the research says. Otherwise, I will have veterinarians coming for me, and I don't want that to be the case. I want this to be a very well-constructed episode about what we can be proactive about in the lives of our dogs to support them and to avoid tragedies like I experienced back in February. This is a big reason why I'm inspired to talk about this, because I went through a horrible, horrible loss, and I just don't want anyone to have to do that. Now, I know that it happens all the time, and it's not to say that it's always preventable, but I do firmly believe there's a lot that we can be doing to support our dogs and their health from diet and lifestyle that might help to potentially avoid or prevent illness or abrupt loss for at least one of you. That is my hope. Even if this is helpful for at least one person and it makes an impact on at least one person, I am so okay with that, because that is at least one person who was able to take something away from this and improve their dog's life as a result of it. So let's dive in. Welcome to Holistic Pet Care. We are exploring all the ins and outs of this topic, and I hope that this allows you to feel more empowered and more inspired in the life of your dog and how you're taking care of your dog, and offers you tangible, realistic ways for you to support their health. And I'm so excited. I will link the information about the book in the show notes. There's also an accompanying recipe book that contains recipes for meals and meal toppers and DIY non-toxic products, which we'll get into. So that is something that you can buy if you want to kind of bypass the more research heavy side of things, which I'm going to be sharing with you today. So you can just bypass all of that, because I'm going to be giving it to you all in this episode. But there is the book, I'll link it in the show notes. I think it's called The Forever Dog Life, I believe. And then that's where there's a lot of information, more applicable information, versus the book, which is more research dense and evidence-based and all that. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. And then I will link all the information in the show notes, and let's get into it. Welcome back to the table. Let's eat. Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, certified holistic health coach, functional nutrition expert, and self-proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the space within which we become well. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, self-development, gut health, mental health, and more. I am so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. So I want to try my very hardest to keep this as concise as possible. You know how things go, though. I'm sometimes all over the place, which is fine, but this is a lot of information that I want to share. So I want to be sure that I'm very intentional about what I'm choosing to share and how I'm choosing to share it and not getting caught up too much in any which way. Okay, so bear with me here. And if I start to ramble, tangent, somebody stop me. All right, that's a joke because you're not here. But anyways, so I want to start by saying veterinary medicine is as much as 20 years behind human medicine. So let's conceptualize that for a sec, and let's think about human medicine and where we are from the lens of holistic health. So we are not, at least for general practitioners, endorsing nutrition and lifestyle in primary care. I think we can all agree on that. I mean, and definitely with specialists, we're certainly not talking about this as much as we should. Maybe you might get the guidance, eat healthy. Oh, you need to exercise more. Oh, you need to lose some weight, whatever the case is from your doctor. But we're not in a mainstream way talking about this as much as we should be. Should. So then think about that translated into veterinary medicine. Okay, if human medicine and human healthcare is not talking about this, and veterinary medicine is 20 years behind human medicine, think about how little conversation, if any, there is being had about nutrition and lifestyle for our dogs. So that gives you a little bit of a picture. Now, I can most certainly speak from experience of my time spent with vets, and I don't think anyone recommended anything about diet and lifestyle in relation to anything that I was navigating with Lou outside of, maybe she has allergies to certain foods. Let's try moving her to another type of food. That was it. And so I completely understand that, but I think this really does an important job here at showcasing how delayed things are, because we look at our experience in healthcare and how disconnected we are from the importance of preventative medicine and understanding how food impacts us and how we feel. And now we're saying that veterinary medicine is 20 years behind that. Oh my goodness. That is very telling about how little information we're given as pet owners, as dog owners, around the importance of diet and lifestyle for their health. And even further to that point, I'm going to read an excerpt here. Modern veterinary medicine follows the same reactive medical approach taught to medical students treating humans, that companion animal degenerative disease is unavoidable and should be expected by midlife, culminating in diagnoses with poor prognoses as our pets age. Vets learn protocols to prescribe after disease is present, but not a single preventative strategy aside from weight management was ever taught during my years of veterinary training. So I don't think a reiteration of the point is necessary here. I think you can clearly see that there is a lot of parallel between the way our practitioners and physicians are trained within our medical system and then how veterinarians are trained. If not, there's more of a deficit within the world of veterinary medicine because of how delayed it is as it relates to healthcare. And also acknowledging how much of an overlap there might be between how humans take care of themselves and then how that impacts their dogs. I mean, I think there's a lot of conversation around this when it comes to generational habits, when it comes to human health, and people like to chalk it up to genetics and say, my parents were overweight, so that's why I inherited that gene. But it's maybe not so much the genetics, it's the lifestyle practices. And the book says, in the Netherlands, researchers found that overweight dogs were more likely to have overweight owners. This shouldn't be a surprise. We see the same thing with children and their parents. The author suggests that the amount of time the human-pet pair spends walking is the greatest predictor of whether the pair is overweight. Another study from Germany showed that we tend to impose our own snacking patterns and attitudes about portion size and processed foods on our pets, which influences how many calories they consume in a day. So this is another important overlap, that the lifestyle of the standard American diet and the lifestyle of Americans who are following those practices is likely influencing their choices as pet owners and even as parents. And it's a scary thought, but that even furthers the need for us to take a look at, okay, well, why aren't we placing more emphasis and more information around how we as humans are taking care of ourselves? Because then we're seeing through the research that can have a massive influence on how we take care of our pets. Now, when it comes to nutrition, the author is very intentional about emphasizing that you can swap out as little as 10% of your dog's daily processed pet food with fresher alternatives and still create a positive change within your dog's body. So that is not a significant change, and it's probably the most cost effective change, is just making a 10% change as opposed to feeling like you need to overhaul every single thing that your dog is eating. There's a lot that you can be adding on top of their meals. Even if their food isn't the highest quality, you can add certain foods to help amplify the nutrition that they're consuming and give them some extra support. So I want to be sure that I make that known throughout the entirety of this episode, that the expectation is not for you to just completely change every single thing that you're giving them. Now, I am going to do my very best to support the dog in the best way possible. And I'm going to be showing all of that all over Instagram and social media and across the podcast. I'm sure this won't be the last episode that I talk about this with, and maybe doing like, oh, this is the first 6 months with the puppy. Actually, I'm going to do that. I'm going to write that down. I'll do like a 6-month mark episode talking about all the things that I've implemented, what I've noticed in her, how training's going. And so stay tuned for that. That'll come in a couple months. But just know that you can do a lot by doing a little and by focusing on just some basics. And I would argue this is the same for human health too. I mean, human health is obviously very complex and there's a lot of areas that we can spend time in, but what a difference even just 1% can make as it relates to making better choices for yourself. So keep that in mind as well. This is not meant to overwhelm you or make you feel like, oh my God, I got to change every single thing and I've got to buy all these new things and blah, blah, blah. No. Not the case. I simply want to provide you with the information and then you take it and do with it what you can. So the one sentence that I want to highlight here is, the goal is to feed low glycemic, fiber-rich, good carbs that nourish your dog's gut and immune system, and avoid feeding high glycemic, refined, bad carbs that provide excess sugar and create metabolic stress. Now, this should not be any surprise to you because this is exactly what we need to be doing as humans. And unfortunately, our dog's food is overwhelming with carbohydrates. I'll give you the exact number here. And dogs don't have a carbohydrate requirement. And that, I think, is huge. I mean, even as humans, carbs are non-essential. We still eat them. They're our body's preferred source of energy because they're broken down into glucose, but they're non-essential. We could survive without them. The average bag of grain-based food is often more than 50% carb, largely from insulin-raising corn or potatoes. And not to mention that a lot of the corn that's found in these foods are mass-produced, and so they are covered in pesticides and herbicides and fungicides, and it's no good. It's impacting the dogs in a number of ways, and yet we've just normalized it. And I think this is very similar to how we've just normalized this in humans as well. And it's fascinating because a lot of this book is just emphasizing how much our dogs need fiber, protein, and fat. And if you know me at all, or if you worked with me, or whatever the case is, that is 110% the guidance I give every single one of my clients is we need to focus on protein and fiber, especially because that is a widespread deficiency that's taking place in both arenas. And this is no different for our dogs. We need to be supporting the dog's immune systems. We need to be supporting the dog's microbiomes. We need to be supporting the dog's detox. And all of that is no stranger to the way that we need to be supporting our health as humans. So as I made my way through this book and as I learned more, it almost made me feel so dumb and naive because obviously I know all these things, but I didn't realize how much of an overlap there was between the way we as humans operate and how important it is for us to focus on these areas on a day-to-day basis, but then also our dogs as well. So I want to talk about nutritional balance because I think this is important, and I recently got some pushback on TikTok about this because people are saying, oh, well, dogs need to have a nutritionally balanced diet, and that's what dog foods are. And I agree with that. I'm sure that they are created and formulated with that in mind, knowing that dogs need certain nutrition. And that's where I obviously need to be cautious, because there's certain nutrients that dogs need, especially in different phases of life. And given she'll be a puppy, that if I were to make meals myself, which is what I started to do with Lou, I have to be cognizant of those needs. I have to be sure she's getting enough of what she needs. But the book states, vets who encourage people to feed dogs pet food their whole lives argue that pet foods have been designed to meet nutritional needs, while junk food clearly does not meet nutritional needs. There are a few ultra-processed human foods that are labeled as all-in-one nutritionally complete foods. Total brand cereals claim to meet 100% of the recommended daily allowance of vitamins and minerals for people, as do some liquid beverages such as Ensure and Soylent. These are the best comparisons to what we've been told to feed our pets for a lifetime. Scientifically formulated everything you need pellets. Granted, many humans consume all-in-one drinks at the beginning and end of their lives, and sometimes in between while we're on the go or during hospital stays. But nutritionists have never recommended using these nutritionally complete products as a sole source of lifetime nutrition. Even scientifically formulated infant formula, which nourishes millions of babies around the world every year, is replaced after several months with real foods that are less processed and more diverse. The only family members eating ultra-processed foods their whole lives are our pets. So I appreciate this comparison because I think it does a really great job at offering us a real life example of what it would be like for a human. It's essentially suggesting that we would be on Ensure for our whole lives. But that, you and I both know, is not the case. Ensure is used for a certain period of time in life, or these more nutritionally balanced all-in-one meal replacements or whatever the case is are not typically foods that we're living on forever. They're just periods of time where it's needed for whatever reason. And I think this also calls into question the marketing and how you can read something that says, oh, this is nutritionally balanced, or that is veterinarian backed or science backed or whatever the case might be. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's quality. I think we all know, walking through the grocery store, we see lots of claims on our packaging, and it can be easy to think, oh, this is a good quality food, or this is what it says, so this is authentic, and this is for me. But if you really take a closer look at it, you realize that's not the case. So this is hugely important. I love this comparison. I wanted to be sure I shared this because while something is meeting our nutritional needs and it's created to do so, doesn't mean that it also doesn't come with concerns around how it's been made, how it's been processed, and what it's also doing to the body. So let's drive home this point. Buckle up, okay? This is about to get really real about dog food, okay? Dog food is even more processed than any human food. If you knew how kibble was made, you begin to see the difference. There's nothing even remotely close to fresh ingredients in any ultra-processed pet food. The bulk ingredients used in commercial pet foods have already been extensively processed before reaching their final resting place in dry pet food, not to mention the fact that the finished product is expected to be shelf-stable for more than a year under ambient conditions. Pet food processing also impacts the quality of the vitamins delivered, with many vitamins lost in production. Adding insult to this unhealthy picture is the fact that crop residues, including glyphosate, turned up in commercial pet food. In an alarming 2018 study, Cornell University research found detectable glyphosate in all 18 commercial dog and cat food products they tested, and concluded that exposure to glyphosate via food consumption is likely higher for pets than humans. They calculated that our pets' exposure to this likely cancer-causing agent is between 4 and 12 times higher than it is for us on a per kilogram basis. Mycotoxins are also found in many commercial dry dog foods. Mycotoxins are toxic chemical substances naturally produced by fungi that infect many grains, including those in pet foods, and are a common reason for recalls. The December 2020 U.S. recall of a kibble contained enough aflatoxins, one type of mycotoxin to kill more than 70 dogs and make hundreds more very sick. Mycotoxins create havoc in your dog's body, from organ disease to immunosuppression to cancer, and their effects are well documented. Pet food companies are not required to test finished pet foods for mycotoxin levels. In one U.S. study, 9 of the 12 dog foods tested were positive for at least one mycotoxin, results that were consistent with findings from Austria, Italy, and Brazil. And as an aside for anyone who wants to know more about mycotoxins in human food, typically this is a conversation that's had around coffee. So looking into mycotoxin tested coffee brands is what I'd recommend if you want to start to consider that a little bit more. But what powerful information about just the processing of the food, okay? So just thinking about how you see all these pet brands, these dog foods with all these fresh meats and fresh vegetables on the packaging, that alone is deceiving. And then to learn about glyphosate and how dogs are 4 to 12 times higher in exposure to glyphosate than we as humans are. And we as humans, let me tell you, we are exposed. So that's pretty wild. And then top it off with the mycotoxins and the impact that that can have on our health. So there's a couple different avenues here. There's a couple different areas that we can consider. Now, we can obviously swap out food, and that's great, but we can also support the body and support our dog's detox and digestion and so forth with all of this in mind, in an attempt to support their body's ability to rid itself of these toxins. But I think one of the best things we can do is simply start to make swaps from the foods that we're choosing, especially the ones that are most commonly found to be problematic, so that they're not even consuming it in the first place. So we'll get back to the food, but I want to also share on the impact of being confined to the indoors and what that does for a dog. We as humans spend more than 90% of our time indoors. And so you think about that, how much of a percentage are dogs spending outdoors if we're spending most of our time indoors? Now, there are dogs out there, and there are areas in the country that are rural and that dogs have the capacity to roam and to be free and to spend time in the dirt, in the grass, and that is one good life for those dogs. That is for sure. But I would argue the majority of dogs who are living in America in this moment in time are not getting the exercise that they need, are not getting the outdoor exposure that they need, because the truth of the matter is Americans are not getting the exposure that they need or the exercise that they need. So let's go back to that original comment about how the impact of pet owners and their practices, how that influences not only their children, but also their animals. So this is huge. But what we're learning is dogs are not getting natural light. They're not getting that exposure for the sake of their circadian rhythm, which we know is incredibly valuable for our human health as well. They're also exposed to pesticide-treated lawns if they are getting outside, which that's a whole different ballgame, and that one is really personal because of what I know Lou was exposed to. We are also exposing them to EMFs, and they're what the book is calling more polluted. They are finding that American pets have higher levels of many of the same synthetic industrial chemicals that researchers have documented in people, including newborns. The research also says that compared to country dogs, city dogs that live indoors the majority of their lives are more likely to have higher levels of anxiety, exhibit signs of more biological stress in their blood work, i.e. higher markers of inflammation and oxidative stress, lack proper exercise, and even suffer from social dysfunction because they never get to play freely with their canine companions and other dogs and other people. Dogs are increasingly isolated, caged by their home, a small room or crate, some completely litter box trained, and always leashed when outside. Rather than patrolling expansive rural properties or even a backyard, they are constricted to small spaces and deprived of the wilds of nature. The author refers to all of this as a built environment, and she's not saying that it's just relevant to dogs, but the built environment that we've created as humans as well. And she's referring to this as being the artificial human-made space in which we live, work, and play. It includes everything from high rises and housing to roads and parks. So it's essentially how much further and further we're disconnecting from our natural way of life, the way our biology thrives, and being able to have the freedom to connect with nature, to get light, to be outside, just continues to become something of the past because we've now created an environment that no longer requires us to do any of those things. We work from home. We're in temperature regulated environments all the time. I think it's called thermo something. Thermo something. We are exposed to artificial lighting chronically all the time. We're not getting enough natural light. We are just simply creating environments that are more conducive, more convenient for our current way of life, but they continue to detract from what our body's natural rhythm is looking for. And that is the same for dogs. Now, more on the topic of toxins. In 2018, the Environmental Working Group performed a seminal study of plastics and food packaging chemicals, heavy metals, fire retardants, and stain-proofing chemicals in pooled samples of blood and urine from 20 dogs and 37 cats collected at a Virginia veterinary clinic. It found that dogs and cats were contaminated with 48 of 70 industrial chemicals tested, including 43 chemicals at levels higher than those typically found in people. Average levels of many chemicals were substantially higher in pets than is typical for people, with 2.4 times higher levels of stain and grease-proofing coatings in dogs, 23 times more fire retardants in cats, and more than 5 times the amount of mercury compared to average levels in people found in national studies conducted by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, otherwise known as the CDC, and the EWG. PFCs are more pervasive than most people think. They are used in surface coating and protectant formulations for paper and cardboard packaging products, carpets, leather products, and textiles that repel water, grease, and soil. PFCs also have been used in firefighting foams. So, the author goes on to emphasize a number of other types of common toxins that are found in our carpeting, in our couches, in dog beds, in dog bowls, in toys. I mean, across the board, there is just so many that we both as humans and dogs are exposed to, and it's not meant to overwhelm you, but just to educate you on how omnipresent these issues are and how important it is for us to be aware of the impact and the presence of them, and that there's a lot that we can do and a lot of choices that we can make to help to mitigate the impact that it has on our dogs, and really just showing the vulnerability of dogs and how they don't make any of these choices. All of these choices are up to us. And so we have a responsibility, if we care about our dogs, to keep all of this in mind and recognizing their susceptibility and how much more intense it might be for them. And then also, hopefully this inspires you to take your health into your own hands as well, because this is not isolated to just dogs. Yes, they might be more vulnerable. The impact on them might be more intense as we're learning about what the research is showing in terms of what shows up in their blood, or, what their food looks like in comparison to ours. However, this is also a learning lesson for us as humans. So what's fascinating is dogs age 6 to 7 times faster than humans, which is no surprise because obviously we know they live much shorter lives than we do as humans. And studies show that body weight is more predictive of lifespan than height, breed, or breed group, and big dog breeds do age more rapidly than small ones. So that's really fascinating because that can be an immediate priority that's made, that regardless of the breed or the height, or, are they a small dog? Are they a large dog? We know that, yes, factors influence outcomes. However, body weight, being sure that your dog is of healthy weight, that is a huge, huge influence on their health outcomes. And this should come as no surprise because being overweight or obese as a human being, immediately that is a risk factor for tons of other issues within your own health. And that is not something new. I think that's certainly always been known and been researched, and there's evidence to support that. So just considering this through the lens of your dog and how you're taking care of your dog to best support their longevity. The author has a pretty firm perspective on neutering and spaying, and I want to read this excerpt because I think it's very interesting and it might give you something to think about. I still have to think a little bit more about what my plan is for the dog and if I plan to wait to get her fixed, but this is what the author has to say. If all of your hormone-producing organs, the ovaries or testicles, were removed before you hit puberty, you'd naturally worry about the long-term effects on your health and your risk for disease. Many women, for example, who have their uteruses removed for health reasons choose to keep their ovaries, if they can, so they can continue to gain the benefits from the important hormones produced there, which we know. Estrogen is super, super important for women's health and for men's health, but especially for women moving through perimenopause and menopause and so forth, the impact of reduced levels of estrogen is enormous. The same logic holds true here for dogs. Typical canine desexing, spaying, and neutering removes organs that researchers now believe are quite important to overall health in dogs. Studies also indicate that the earlier a puppy is spayed or neutered, the greater the likelihood of health problems later in life, from abnormal bone growth and bone cancer to an increased incidence of adverse reactions to vaccines and behavioral challenges like fear and aggression. Dr. Becker's recommendation to pet parents who have not desexed their dogs yet is to consider a hysterectomy or a vasectomy instead. These procedures lead to the same end result, sterilization, but without the negative physiological side effects. So she mentioned this in the episode of the podcast that I listened to that she was a guest on, and she said that it's hard to find a vet who will do this. I'm going to try to find a vet who will do it. I'm going to look into it and see, like, what does this entail? Is this common? What is the cost comparison? But I am going to try to delay having her fixed as long as I can, because I know that at least can be beneficial. But it's fascinating, right? Because this is just a common step that we take as pet owners, obviously for good reason. There's concern around the outcomes of what could happen if you didn't, right? However, I think it's interesting that this is connected to long-term issues. And I mean, it makes sense. You know, you think about it, if a young girl around puberty had her uterus and her ovaries and so forth removed, then there would be cause for concern. There would be issues that would take place as a result of that. So to think that this is any different for dogs, I think it's an interesting comparison. Okay, slight interruption in this episode. I could cry right now. I just lost the last 25 minutes of the episode, and it was so good. It was so good. So we're back. We're going to try this again. I will say that this series is going to be multiple parts. So this is just part one. I just don't have enough time to dive into every single topic that I want to talk about. So hopefully that's a good thing to hear. Hopefully you're excited for it. But this is part one of my holistic pet care series. And I have no real intentions of giving you there's going to be 3 parts or 5 parts, because I don't know how many parts there's going to be. It's just going to be a continuation and a series that's ongoing, especially as I continue to raise tallow. So let's return to talking about nutrition. I want to talk about something called advanced glycation end products. So when we have this reaction that takes place within the body, it's called glycation. And it occurs anytime there is heat, glucose, and protein found together. And it's a chemical reaction that occurs both inside and outside of our bodies. And when it occurs inside of our bodies, it causes premature aging and inflammation in dogs and in humans. So in addition to the AGEs that are found in the body, we'll say just as part of something that takes place within the body, there's also foods that contain these AGEs that have been processed using heat. Now, dog food is ultra processed. there is obvious processing that takes place in order to create what we know as dog foods. And what happens when it comes to glycation in food processing, it refers to a process called the Maillard reaction, and the end result is Maillard reaction products. So when we consume or feed food that contains MRPs, Maillard reaction products, we compound our burden of having to deal with these toxic substances. We eat them, and our bodies make them. Now, the reason I'm sharing on this is not only to educate you on something you might want to look into as a human, but a 2018 study out of the Netherlands found dogs consume up to 122 times the AGEs in their diets as humans. 122 times, just based on the food that they're eating. Okay? Now, I want to share this excerpt about the research, or lack thereof, around pet food. The big 5 pet food companies, now, you can give that some thought. I'm sure you can guess what are the big 5 pet food companies, conduct some internal research that never reaches the general public. But there's no government-funded National Institutes of Health for Pets. Now, this is no different from the health research that is done on humans. I just listened to a podcast this weekend, and they were talking about the efficacy of statins and cholesterol and markers and all of that. And this doctor essentially said there's a lot of research that never sees the light of day. Number one, and probably the foremost reason, because the pharmaceutical companies are responsible for funding the research. So if they're funding the research to be done, then of course, if there's an unfavorable result that shows up or that demonstrates some opposition to their product, why would that be something that they'd want to disclose? So similarly, no one is funding very important basic research that allows veterinarians to know more about how food impacts health and disease, or what the consequences or benefits are to the arbitrary feeding trends not rooted in any science. Now, this is also something similar with what's going on in the health and wellness space. Dr. Mark Hyman asked this doctor, okay, so then what's the deal with food? Why is there not more research rooted in food? And it's because we can't get we can't get money to fund those studies, but we can get money to fund the pharmaceutical research because there's tons and tons of money in the pharmaceutical industry. So no one is funding the basic nutrition research that allows vets to know more about how food impacts health and disease, right? That could obviously bring to light a lot of value to us as pet owners as to what we should be feeding them. But we're also not looking at research for these dog foods. And when she's referring to feeding trends not rooted in any science, she's referring to feeding ultra-processed fast food to pets for decades and telling people it's healthy and the best possible choice. We don't know if it's healthy because there's not one study comparing a group of dogs that eat real food their whole lives to a group that eats ultra-processed foods their whole lives. We don't have any basic research that answers the common sense questions many pet parents have, and in one regard, we think the industry wants to keep it that way. What happens if we measure the levels of AGEs, mycotoxins, glyphosate, or heavy metals in pet food and discover they far exceed the level thought safe for humans? Some advocacy groups have done this on a small scale, testing a handful of popular brands for contaminants with scary results that have sometimes resulted in pet food recalls. So overall, the research is limited. So it's both, there's limited research around healthy, real whole foods for dogs. There is some, but it's limited, and there's no funding for it. That's why it's limited. And then also there's limited research around the ultra processed foods and the health implications that are there. And we're not looking at any of this. We're not looking at
the value of real whole foods for dogs, but we're also not looking at what's actually going on with the food that we are feeding them. And I think it's problematic both ways. Obviously, we want research in both arenas so then we can make the most educated choice and the most informed choice on what we should be feeding our pets. Let's briefly talk about pet food recalls. So, the book says kibble and treats made up about 80% of the total pounds of pet food recalls. Pet food products recalled. The top 4 causes of recalls based on pounds of food were bacterial contamination, so salmonella, toxic levels of synthetic vitamins, unapproved antibiotics, and pentobarbital, an animal euthanasia solution contamination. The other category includes freeze-dried, cooked, and frozen diets and toppers, but recalls include only products that have been tested for a handful of accepted problems, most commonly excessive levels of a synthetic vitamin or mineral and potentially pathogenic bacteria. Because the FDA doesn't require companies to test for other types of foodborne toxins, pet foods aren't recalled for shocking levels of glyphosate, otherwise known as Roundup, or AGEs. But neither is human food. Human food isn't recalled for mycotoxins. It's not recalled for the glyphosate that it's treated with. It's not recalled for the carcinogenic ingredients. It's not recalled for any of that, and it should be, and it's not. So this is no surprise to me that these foods for dogs are also not recalled based on what they commonly contain, because we look at the food industry and the foods that we're eating, same thing. And it's not being considered. It's normalized because the FDA has approved for human consumption, but we know that there's harm to it, and yet it's still something that we routinely choose to eat. Now, something else I found super interesting is this story about how prescription diets became a thing. In 1948, veterinarian Dr. Mark Morris partnered with Hill Rendering Works to create the first prescription pet food diets. To this day, the term prescription diet is misleading. There aren't any medications or special substances included in these diets. They're called prescription because they're sold only by veterinarians. These popular diets weren't always so popular. In fact, Hill's Science Diet struggled to be profitable in the 1970s until toothpaste giant Colgate purchased the company and wooed customers by using pages from their own expert brand ambassador marketing strategy. Colgate had struck gold when it had dentists smile while holding tubes of toothpaste, declaring the brand most dentists recommend. Colgate toothpaste became an instant top seller after the company's marketing team decided to try this novel marketing approach. Now the company knew how to strike gold. You hear tallow in the back. Okay, there she is. Really big and scary you are. If it worked for dentists and toothpaste, why not vets and dog food? Sorry for that interruption. I just had to remove her from the 96th thing that she has tried to chew today. Soon enough, Science Diet replaced its arrangements with dental schools in the veterinary world, striking contracts with vet schools and even funding nutritional professorships. Today, every veterinary school has partnerships with one of the top 5 pet food brands. A few good questions. What happens when medical and vet schools have exclusive alliances with industries like pharmaceutical companies and food manufacturers? Is this not a patent conflict of interest? Do these alliances seed bias in the school's research and the education of their students? So, something to think about. I said this on TikTok and got a lot of pushback about veterinarians having partnerships with these brands, but that's how it usually is. It's a symbiotic relationship that's there. And I also want to drive the point home that a lot of the common pet food brands, so Purina, Pedigree, Iams, these are all owned by larger companies like Nestle. Nestle is a huge company up there with PepsiCo, and Mars, which makes all the candy. One of my best friends works for Mars Pet Care. So they're all coming from the same tree. They're not any different necessarily from our food industry, unfortunately. And I think just that alone, knowing that they descend from these larger corporations that create our food industry, that make up our food industry, It says a lot about the quality. Now, there is an association called the Association of American Feed Control Officials, and they exist to set nutrition parameters for pet food manufacturers. So I'm going to list off some of the issues with the ultra processed food industry as it relates to dogs and pet care, and some of the deficits. So, pet food packaging does not include a nutritional panel similar to the labels on human food that identifies the quantity of nutrients in the food, including how much sugar or starch is in the food. AAFCO owns the pet food ingredient definitions listed on pet food products. Now, this one, you might need to sit down for this. To find out AAFCO's definition of chicken, you must buy its official publication for $250. Spoiler alert, pet food chicken is not the same as grocery store chicken. Okay. So that's slightly concerning. What is it then? There shouldn't be a need to define chicken, and I certainly shouldn't have to pay $250 to determine what it is. Next, digestibility studies are optional. No batch testing is required for nutritional adequacy, contaminants, or toxins. In the United States, AAFCO sets the minimum requirements for pet foods to be considered nutritionally complete, but only a few nutrients have maximum thresholds. This means it's acceptable to produce a pet food with excessive amounts of other nutrients that can cause organ damage. And lastly, multiple studies validate that many pet food products are not accurately labeled, with higher cost ingredients or proteins replaced with cheaper unlabeled ingredients. So this is serious cause for concern, and that's only a fraction of it. It just makes you question a little bit more about what's going on. I think there's just a lot of trust that's put into these brands, and they have solid marketing tactics. We just give them the benefit of the doubt. That's kind of how I see it, where we just normalize this is what pet food is. We have normalized it because it's on our shelves, and I think we've also just assumed, which I think goes for the food industry too, that we assume, well, it's on the shelf, so it must be safe. And that, I think we need to call into question a little bit more. Now, we know that obviously genetics play a role in our dog's health, but there's also a lot that we can do from lifestyle. We call that epigenetics. That makes a huge difference. The author says, we can change the expression of many genes that have a direct bearing on our health and longevity. The same is true for most of our canine companions, with one caveat. It's up to us to make wise decisions for them. And that's so true. Something else I think that is important that I mentioned before is the fact that we have domesticated our animals, our dogs, right? For good reason. We want them as companions. We want to love them. We want to take care of them. They become our friends. There's unconditional love, except right now she's on the couch and I don't know why she thinks she's allowed to do that. Hold that thought. I really appreciate this real time puppy interruption that we're having here. We have domesticated our dogs, and obviously this is something we've been doing for years and decades, and it's wonderful. However, we have largely taken them away from how their biology is meant to be treated, we'll say. You know, the oldest dog that ever lived to 31, which I think is crazy. He lived in Portugal, and when you listen to how his lifestyle was, you're like, wow, that is very different from the way that we live our lives here with our dogs and the way we raise our dogs. I forget what the term was that I used before, but it's about kind of this structured environment that essentially we create for them because that's how it works. You're the dog, I am training you, and you live on my terms. I tell you where you sleep. I walk you on a leash where I say we should go. You know, I tell you when you're going to eat. I tell you when you're going to get exercise, right? And that's very different from what dogs do in the wild. Now, it's not to say that we have to keep our dogs, in the wild and we don't have to let them run the show. The reason I thought about this is because of the fact that I learned through my reading, and this is where I'm going to tie it up for this episode, that fasting is actually really good for dogs. We know that fasting from like an aging longevity perspective for humans is actually valuable. And there's certain pathways you can look at. They're called mTOR, AMPK. Look into them if you're interested. Dr. Mark Hyman talks a lot about this in his book, Young Forever. So highly recommend taking a read. But from a health perspective for dogs, fasting is actually very healthy for them. And it's more like time restricted eating. So being sure that you're not leaving food down all the time. I feel like that's more common with cats, but could be relevant for your situation. But I think just focusing on this fasting or time restricted eating structure mimics more appropriately what their biology would be used to in the real world, we'll say, in the real world. Because they weren't eating at 6 a.m. in the morning and at 7 p.m. at night. They were eating when they found food. So when you think about that, their biology isn't used to this constant flow influx of energy, and it's actually metabolically more stimulating, we'll say, when they're able to take breaks. So for example, I think about when with Lou, I would either be out and I wouldn't get back, till 8 o'clock to feed her, or, time would pass and it'd be later, be like, oh my God, I forgot. I didn't even give her, whatever. And I would be like, I'll just feed her now. But what I'm learning is, and what the author suggests is, if you forget, just don't feed them. Just let them be and feed them the next morning, because it's actually better for their bodies and their health to allow them those periods of fasting, or what they call time restricted eating. So keeping an eye on how much and with what frequency you're feeding your dog is also important. And overall, I just want to bring it back to that original point around recognizing that, through domestication, we are taking care of our dogs in a way that is different from what their bodies are used to. And so with that said, we have to be aware of what we can still do to support their bodies in a way that is most conducive to health. Because obviously we as Americans and the modern American lifestyle is not only impacting us, but it's also impacting them. So something to think about, something to consider. You don't see dogs out in the wild that are overweight. You don't see dogs out in the wild that have cancer, or, I'm sure you're not checking, but this domestication process is really what induces this. I mean, there's a statistic in there. I think I'm going to read more on this next episode on cancer in dogs, just because it obviously hits home with Lou. But I think it's like 1 in 3 dogs get cancer now. It's crazy. So something to keep in mind. But I appreciate you tuning in. I hope that you're enjoying these episodes. I'm really bummed because I feel like I was really excited about the remainder of the episode that I recorded earlier, and then I went back to upload it and it was gone. So I hope that nonetheless you enjoyed this, and this will be a series. I want to do more application of it, so as I share this information and kind of synthesize it a bit, I'm also going to be sharing more application of it in my own personal life with tallow, and give you some more strategies on how you can support your dogs. Not with the expectation that you're going to overhaul their whole lifestyle, but just small ways that you can support them. That's going to make a big difference. So thank you for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you learned something about holistic dog wellness and all that good stuff. And just so you know, I only made it to like page 80, and there's like 400 pages in this book. So I definitely was overambitious thinking that this could be consolidated in one episode, but there's more to come. I hope you look forward to it. And until next time, be well.